So you want to own a luxury apartment complex. Imagine standing across the street from a luxury apartment complex on a Friday evening. The entrance is framed by warm lighting. Cars move quietly into an underground garage. Behind the glass doors, there is a polished lobby, a coffee bar, a fitness center, and a leasing office that looks more like the reception area of a boutique hotel. Hundreds of people live inside, and every month, every one of them sends rent to the same owner. From the sidewalk, it looks almost unfair. Build the apartments once, fill them with tenants, collect rent for decades. The building appears to be doing all the work. But that view leaves out nearly everything that determines whether the investment succeeds. Because a luxury apartment complex is not simply a large collection of homes. It is a hotel that rarely closes. It is a small utility company. It is a parking business, a landscaping business, a security operation, a maintenance department, and a customer service company. And above all, it is a very expensive financial asset that may depend on borrowed money every day that it exists. To understand the business, imagine that you are considering a fictional property called Harbor Point. Harbor Point contains 200 apartments in a growing American city. It has a swimming pool, a gym, package lockers, landscaped courtyards, controlled access, and a 5-story parking structure. The property is attractive, recently built, and almost fully occupied. This is not a real building. The numbers in our example are simplified assumptions designed to show how the business works. A real investment would require local rental data, tax records, insurance quotations, engineering reports, and professional legal and financial advice. But Harbor Point will allow us to answer a surprisingly difficult question. What are you actually buying when you buy a luxury apartment complex? At first, the answer seems obvious. You are buying apartments. But tenants are not really paying only for the apartments. They are paying for the location. They are paying for convenience. They are paying for the lobby being clean when guests arrive. They are paying for the elevator working on Monday morning. They are paying for the pool being open in summer, the garage gate opening at midnight, and someone answering when water begins coming through the ceiling. Luxury is not a feature installed during construction. Luxury is a promise that must be kept every day, and every promise has a cost. So before we calculate what Harbor Point might earn, we need to understand what makes the rent possible in the first place. Because the expensive countertops may help lease the apartment, but they are not what keeps the business alive. Suppose the average apartment at Harbor Point rents for $2,800 per month. Multiply that by 200 apartments, and the result appears enormous. At full occupancy, the property could theoretically bill $560,000 every month. That is more than $6.7 million per year. This is normally the moment when the building begins to look like a machine that produces money. But billed rent is not the same as collected rent, and collected rent is not the same as profit. Some apartments will be empty between tenants. Some residents will receive leasing incentives. Some payments will arrive late. A tenant may leave unexpectedly. Another may dispute a charge. A unit may remain unavailable while flooring, paint, appliances, or water damage are repaired. So Harbor Point will almost never collect its maximum theoretical rent. Let us assume that after vacancy, concessions, and unpaid balances, the property collects about 95% of its potential apartment rent. Again, that is an assumption for this example, not a universal market average. The complex may also collect money from parking, storage rooms, pet fees, utility reimbursements, application charges, and other services. These smaller income streams matter, but they can create a dangerous illusion. When a property earns an extra $100 from a resident, it does not necessarily keep $100. The garage must be cleaned. The access system must be repaired. Packages require lockers, software, cameras, and staff time. Pets increase wear in hallways, elevators, lawns, and apartments. Even convenience has an operating cost. After accounting for apartments that are not producing rent and adding reasonable secondary income, imagine that Harbor Point collects approximately $6.5 million during a normal year. That sounds like the answer. It is not. It is only the top line. The money must now pass through the building. First comes payroll. A property of this size may need a manager, leasing employees, maintenance technicians, cleaning staff, grounds workers, and after-hours support. Some jobs may be outsourced, but outsourcing changes the invoice, not the need. Then come utilities for shared areas. The lights in the garage do not care whether the apartments are fully occupied. The pool equipment does not stop using electricity because leasing was slow this month. Elevators, ventilation systems, gates, pumps, fire systems, irrigation, security cameras, and hallway climate control all continue operating. Then come repairs. A single apartment has a refrigerator, an oven, plumbing fixtures, electrical outlets, doors, windows, flooring, and heating or cooling equipment. Harbor Point has 200 versions of almost everything that can break in one home. And outside the apartments are hundreds of additional systems that residents expect never to notice. That expectation is the product. Luxury apartment buildings age in a particularly uncomfortable way. Their rents depend partly on appearing new, but the moment they open, thousands of people begin using them. Residents roll furniture across the floors. Delivery drivers move through the lobby. Cars scrape garage walls. Sunlight fades outdoor furniture. Water reaches places it was never supposed to reach. And every year, a newer building may open nearby with a larger gym, better appliances, smarter locks, faster internet, and an introductory discount. An ordinary apartment can sometimes compete by being affordable. A luxury property is competing on experience. That means Harbor Point cannot simply remain functional. It must remain desirable. The pool furniture may still work, but look outdated. The lobby flooring may still be safe, but no longer photograph well. The fitness equipment may still operate, but residents comparing properties online may see it as old. This creates two categories of spending. The first is routine operation: cleaning, minor repairs, payroll, landscaping, utilities, administration, and contracts. The second is capital spending: replacing major equipment, renovating apartments, repairing roofs, resurfacing parking areas, upgrading amenities, and dealing with systems that eventually reach the end of their useful lives. These categories may appear differently in accounting, but the owner ultimately needs cash for both. And delaying the second category can temporarily make the property look more profitable than it really is. Imagine that Harbor Point reports a strong year. Occupancy is high, rent collections are stable, repairs appear controlled. But the elevators are approaching a major service cycle. Several heating and cooling systems are becoming unreliable. The pool deck needs resurfacing. The garage has drainage problems, and dozens of apartments still contain the original appliances. None of these problems may destroy this year's income statement, but they are already inside the investment. They are simply waiting for a date. This is why experienced buyers do not evaluate only the money a property produced last year. They examine the physical systems that will demand money next year, 3 years from now, and 10 years from now. They inspect roofs, plumbing, electrical capacity, drainage, elevators, fire protection, foundations, facades, balconies, garages, and environmental conditions. Because a beautiful lobby can hide an expensive building. Suppose Harbor Point uses about $2.7 million during the year for ordinary operating expenses. That would include categories such as staff, management, utilities, repairs, insurance, taxes, landscaping, cleaning, security, marketing, and administration. The exact amount for a real property could be very different. Subtract those assumed expenses from the approximately $6.5 million collected, and Harbor Point produces about $3.8 million before financing costs, income taxes, and major capital projects. In commercial real estate, this operating result is commonly discussed as net operating income, and this is the number around which the value of the building begins to move. But it is still not the owner's take-home profit, because we have not discussed the largest force in the deal: the debt. Very few buyers purchase a large luxury apartment complex entirely with cash. A property may cost tens of millions of dollars, so the buyer normally combines investor equity with a commercial loan. The investors provide part of the purchase price. The lender provides the rest. This allows the investors to control a much larger asset than they could buy with cash alone. When everything works, debt can increase the return on their equity. When conditions move against the property, the same debt can remove their margin for error. Suppose Harbor Point is purchased for $70 million. Assume the investors contribute $28 million and borrow the remaining $42 million. Those figures are purely illustrative. The loan has interest, required payments, legal conditions, reserves, and a maturity date. Unlike a typical 30-year residential mortgage, a commercial loan may need to be refinanced or repaid after a shorter period, even if its payment schedule is calculated over a longer timeline. This creates a problem that may not appear during the first year: refinancing risk. Imagine that Harbor Point is operating well. The apartments are mostly occupied. Residents are paying. The property is producing positive income. But when the loan matures, interest rates are higher than they were when the property was purchased. The new lender values the building more conservatively, or the lender is willing to provide less debt. The owners may then need to contribute additional cash simply to keep an otherwise functioning property. A building can therefore experience financial pressure without losing most of its residents. The problem does not always begin in the apartments. It may begin in the capital markets. This is one of the strangest parts of commercial real estate. The tenants see the same pool. The lobby looks the same. The rent checks continue arriving. But the building's value can change because investors demand a different return, lenders charge more for money, or buyers become less willing to take risk. Suppose Harbor Point's annual loan payments consume roughly $2.7 million. Subtract that from the assumed $3.8 million of operating income, and approximately $1.1 million remains before investor-level taxes and major capital spending. That is still meaningful cash. But remember what the investors contributed: $28 million. A property collecting more than $500,000 in some months may leave its investors with far less than the headline revenue suggests. And if a major renovation absorbs $700,000, the cash available to distribute can shrink quickly. The important question is therefore not, how much rent does the building collect? It is, how much cash remains after the building, the staff, the government, the insurer, the contractors, and the lender have all been paid. That is a very different number. Luxury apartments can produce stable income because people need places to live. But luxury renters usually have options. They may choose another building. They may buy a home. They may relocate for work. They may move to a less expensive apartment when the economy slows. And because luxury complexes often compete with newer properties, keeping occupancy can become expensive. Suppose a resident paying $2,800 per month decides not to renew. The owner does not simply lose one rent payment. The unit must be inspected. It may need cleaning, paint, repairs, new flooring, appliance service, or replacement fixtures. Staff must advertise it, answer inquiries, conduct tours, process an application, and prepare a new lease. The unit may remain empty during that process. And if several competing buildings are offering discounts, Harbor Point may need to offer several weeks of free rent to attract the next resident. One departure can therefore create lost rent, repair costs, labor, marketing expenses, and a concession at the same time. Multiply that across dozens of annual move-outs, and tenant retention becomes one of the most valuable parts of the business. This is why the maintenance request about a noisy air conditioner matters. It is not only a repair ticket, it may be the moment a resident begins searching for another apartment. Luxury also creates a reputation problem. Residents are not comparing Harbor Point only with housing. They are comparing its service with hotels, premium gyms, co-working spaces, and other businesses built around convenience. A broken gate in an inexpensive building is frustrating. A broken gate in a property marketed as luxury can feel like a broken promise. Online reviews can preserve that frustration long after the gate is repaired. So management must respond quickly. But speed costs money. The property needs staff, contractors, replacement parts, software, and systems that can react before a small complaint becomes a leasing problem. There is another risk: concentration. If Harbor Point is located near one major employer, one business district, or one industry, demand may look diversified because hundreds of residents occupy the building. but many of those residents may depend on the same local economy. If the employer cuts jobs, remote work reduces the value of the location, or a district loses popularity, several leases may weaken at once. 200 tenants do not always represent 200 independent sources of demand. Sometimes they represent the same economic bet repeated 200 times. That is why the neighborhood matters more than the marble in the lobby. The building can be renovated. The location cannot. Now imagine that Harbor Point has performed reasonably well for 5 years. The investors have received some cash distributions, rents have increased modestly, the staff has maintained occupancy. The property appears successful. What happens next? The owners have several choices. They can keep operating it, they can renovate it, they can refinance it, or they can sell it. This is where many investment presentations become optimistic. They assume the building will be worth more in the future. Sometimes it will. If operating income grows, the neighborhood improves, and buyers remain confident, the sale price may increase. But appreciation is not guaranteed. The future buyer will examine the same risks the current owner examined: income, expenses, physical condition, local supply, financing, and the return available from competing investments. If insurance, payroll, taxes, or repairs rise faster than rent, the building may collect more revenue while producing only slightly more operating income. If interest rates remain high, buyers may be unwilling to pay the same price for each dollar of income. If several new luxury developments open nearby, Harbor Point may need to renovate or offer discounts just to defend its existing rents. The exit price is therefore not simply today's purchase price plus 5 years of optimism. It is the price another investor is willing and able to finance at that moment. Suppose Harbor Point's operating income grows from $3.8 million to $4.1 million over several years. That sounds positive, but if the market begins valuing apartment income more conservatively, the property might sell for less than the owners expected. The operation improved. The valuation did not cooperate. This is why buying correctly matters so much. A buyer who pays a high price based on perfect occupancy, continued rent increases, inexpensive financing, and minimal repairs has created a deal in which almost everything must go right. A more cautious buyer leaves room for normal problems: a few empty apartments, a delayed repair, a slower leasing season, a larger insurance bill, a renovation that costs more than expected. The purpose of financial analysis is not to predict every problem. That is impossible. It is to determine whether the property can survive problems that should have been expected. And apartment buildings will have problems, not because they are bad investments, but because they are buildings filled with people, machines, water, electricity, contracts, and debt. Something will always require attention. The only uncertainty is which thing and when. So, should you own a luxury apartment complex? Under the right conditions, it can be an extraordinary asset. It can collect income from hundreds of leases instead of depending on one tenant. It can benefit from long-term demand for housing. Professional management can improve operations. Renovations can increase rents. And a strong property in a strong location may remain valuable for generations. But none of those advantages make the business passive. The owner is not buying a giant rent check. The owner is buying a system that converts location, buildings, service, and capital into housing that residents choose to pay for every month. When the system works, the revenue looks smooth. Behind that smooth revenue is constant activity. A maintenance technician responding to a leak, a leasing employee following up with an applicant, a manager reviewing unpaid balances, a contractor inspecting an elevator, an accountant tracking utilities, an attorney updating lease language, an insurer recalculating risk, and a lender watching the property's income. The pool is visible. The reserve account is not. The rooftop terrace is visible. The loan maturity is not. The full parking garage is visible. The cost of replacing its concrete, lighting, drainage, gates, and ventilation is not. This is what makes luxury apartment complexes so easy to misunderstand. The most attractive parts of the investment are the easiest to photograph. The most important parts often exist inside spreadsheets, contracts, mechanical rooms, and inspection reports. In our simplified Harbor Point example, a property collecting around $6.5 million in annual revenue might produce roughly $3.8 million before debt payments. After servicing a large loan, the remaining annual cash could be closer to $1.1 million before major capital projects and investor taxes. Those numbers are not a forecast, and they are not a claim about a particular market. They simply demonstrate the distance between revenue and spendable cash, and that distance is where the business actually lives. A good owner understands the residents. A great owner also understands the building. But the owner who survives understands the debt. Because luxury can attract tenants. Amenities can justify rent. Management can protect occupancy. Yet none of those things eliminate the price paid to acquire the property or the terms used to finance it. After seeing the lobby, the apartments, the pool, the staff, the maintenance, the insurance, the vacancies, the renovations, and the loan, the central question is no longer whether luxury apartments can make money. Of course they can. The question is whether the buyer understands how many different businesses must operate correctly before that money finally reaches the owner. Because a luxury apartment complex may look like one building, financially, it is hundreds of promises stacked on top of one another. And every month, the rent arrives only if enough of those promises are kept. If you enjoyed this breakdown, like the video and subscribe to the channel. And share it with someone who sees a full apartment building and assumes every illuminated window is pure profit. Thanks for watching.